This world has a lot of problems. Having good, high quality, affordable cameras is not one of them. However, one of the least talked about issues in this planet is the epidemic of male videographers and photographers who have extremely low test. They're whining, crying at which camera is better, which camera is the best, which camera has the best features. All of this small penis measuring contests out there on the videography and photography streets. But luckily, Lumix has solved all of these issues because all of you other D-bag fanboys can shut the F up, because the S1 Mark II is now the greatest camera you can buy. 100% sure. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The best camera you can buy. Probably under $6,000. If you are primarily a video shooter who sometimes likes to be a loser, D-bag trash, and dabble in some photography, which is basically the same thing as capturing video, but it's only one frame. But that is neither here nor there. When the Lumix S1 Mark II was released, I had my fair share of criticism towards it. And of course, I tried it and I became the biggest piece of trash sellout the history has ever seen. I switched from Sony after using it for over a decade to Lumix S1 Mark II. And I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again today, it was purely because of image quality compared to what I was filming with primarily, which was my Sony FX3, and detail, color depth, clean ass footage when editing just pulled me towards the Lumix S1 Mark II. And of course, the fact that I filmed 2 weddings with the Lumix S1 Mark II and I realized that the autofocus was legit. And that was all I needed. The most common criticism I heard in my comments and wherever about the Lumix S1 Mark II, S1R2, S1iiE is the fact that it has overheating issues. Even though every single other camera with a hybrid body with the viewfinder has issues with overheating, processing far less information, with less image fidelity, with less pixels, all of the things. The Lumix S1 Mark II was heavily criticized. And it's understandably so if you're spending $3,200 on a camera and you're trying to film and your camera overheats on you. And to be quite honest, I wouldn't have known anything about it if I didn't hear about it. And then I went out on my hot ass deck, 90-degree weather. And yes, at 5.1K 60p open gate, it overheated on me in 6 minutes in direct sunlight in 90 degrees. And at first it came to quite a shock to me and a bunch of other Lumix, fanboy douchebag trash that owns, S5 Mark II and all that stuff, because Lumix has never really had overheating issues at all. Like, it's one of the most reliable brands out of all camera brands in terms of overheating. So when the S1II, S1R2 started having overheating issues, it came as a shock to everybody. And in my mind, knowing what I knew about Lumix since I started doing this videography shit back in 2014, I knew Lumix was going to do something to fix it. So every time anyone ever said anything about, Lumix has some overheating issues, I always said, hey, don't worry about it. I'm sure a firmware update is on the way to alleviate this issue. And of course, today, right now, there's a new firmware update available for the Lumix S1 Mark II, S1R2, and S1iiE to actually do a lot of things. But the main one I'm going to focus on is what most people's concerns were, because other than overheating, the Lumix S1 Mark II and what it offers is, for the most part, immaculate. I'm not going to speak too much about S1R2 because I don't have it. I have the S1. I have two S1 Mark IIs and one S1IIE. This is one of my S1IIs. This is my S1IIE. I'm filming with the other S1 Mark II. And they basically, based on the tests, pretty much showed huge improvements in terms of overheating tests throughout the board. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of winter here in Maryland, where I live, and I can't really accurately do like a direct sunlight overheating tests on these cameras. I just don't have like a real world situation. And I've mentioned this before also, I myself, I have filmed over 9 weddings with the Lumix S1 Mark II. I've filmed a bunch of corporate stuff, including 2 corporate shoots this week on the new firmware, and I never got overheating issues. I have never had any overheating issues with my Lumix S1 Mark II filming in 5.1K 60p, 4K, 6K 24p open gate for extended periods of time in real professional shoots. And the longest time was literally filming in 4K 24p for like almost 8 hours straight. I had to turn it off once to change the battery and turn it off other times just to move the camera to another spot for a different angle. But for those 7 to 8 hours, the amount of time that the camera spent off was probably 30 seconds here and there. No overheating issues. It was in a dental office. It wasn't direct sunlight, but there was a lot of us in there, and it started getting really warm. Like the ambient temperature in that room started getting really warm. Camera had no signs of overheating. So am I going to sit here and say like you're never going to be able to overheat the Lumix S1 Mark II filming in 120 frames per second and all that bullcrap? No, I'm not saying that. It's still a possibility. I mean, even the FX3 could overheat. FX30 will overheat, and those are supposed to be like some, cool, like no overheating cameras. So what it came down to, and what I was told, was that there was just some type of sensor sensitivity issue when it came to if you were inside in like if you're inside in cool room temperature, and then you went outside and it was 90 plus degrees in direct sunlight, the big temperature change causes the camera to read itself as overheating. And so that caused a lot of premature, overheating. If you were thinking about buying S1 Mark II and you had concerns about overheating, I think you shouldn't have been concerned to begin with, and you should definitely not be concerned now. So I'm gonna be quite honest with you. There is no camera brand out there. Okay, I don't care about Canon R6 III, C50, A7 V, whatever even Sony has down the pipeline for like small body, mirrorless cameras under $6,000. There's nothing that is going to be touching what the Lumix S1 Mark II is capable of for a while. I know I mentioned that, the temperature change is something that causes that early overheat warning on the Lumix S1 Mark II. But I'm pretty confident that Lumix S1 Mark II does some additional processing that other cameras don't do, which leads to its better image quality overall. And I'm not talking about just resolution, but like just like the juice, the depth and the colors and all that stuff. It's doing other things beyond every other camera that competes against it does. And that is why it was more prone to overheating. But again, the firmware heavily addresses this issue. Other things I want to talk about is that before, when you were shooting in 4K 120 frames per second full frame, there was no subject tracking autofocus. There was autofocus, but you couldn't subject track anymore. The new firmware update enables you to have subject tracking, subject tracking in 4K 120. However, the 4K 120 in the Lumix S1RII is not going to have as good as like 4K 60, 4K 24, 4K 96 frames per second, because it has a slightly lower bit readout. So if you want the best quality super slow motion, it is best to shoot in 4K 96 frames per second, which will allow you to slow down footage up to 25%, or do APS-C mode 4K 120 to maintain the same image quality as all the other modes. So there's that. Also, autofocus has been more stabilized, improved, even though I've had no issues with it. In my tests, doing all of the corporate shoots and the wedding shoots and stuff like that with the new firmware, I mean, it was good then, it's good now. I don't have any issues with it. The one change they did do that is noticeable is that you can now do the same eye box as every other douchebag camera brand. Before, it was like a box around the face with a cross on the eye that the camera is focusing on. Now you have a choice to just have the little square box, the same way every other camera brand does it. The only thing that I have gripes about this system is that the eye box is yellowish orange, and sometimes it matches the skin tone of the person, kind of like me right now, and it could be hard to see sometimes. So I'm hoping Lumix in the future will give you the option to change that to a different color, because the orange is a little bit too clashy with skin tones. But other than that, there's a plethora of other improvements with the firmware updates, other than any overheating issues. Another autofocus improvement is, before, when you're doing human subject tracking, it would have a bunch of boxes on, if you had 10 different humans on the screen, there would be a bunch of boxes in all of them, and the box of the person you are primarily focusing on will be a different color. But now you could turn off all of the boxes and only have one box on the one person that you want to track. There is now the ability to do open gate light, meaning you can film in 3x2 3840 by 2560 open gate, and these are going to be smaller file sizes. It's 420 10-bit. This is pretty much for you to film in a lighter bit rate, so it's easier to edit, easier to deliver for social media quickly. There's some improvements to false color display. There's improvements to the dual native ISO operation. This is basically just some slight color changes when you go from low base ISO to higher base ISO. There'll be like a color change, so it's more noticeable. So when you're using different cameras, let's say you don't get confused between S1II and S1iiE, or when you are doing Vlog on S1 Mark II versus RLog-C on S1 Mark II, because the high base ISOs are different in all the cameras. I believe it's 5,000 on the S1 Mark II in Vlog, but in RLog-C it's 4,000. So, when you're going from camera to camera, you could see a distinct color change to show you that, hey, look, you're in the second base ISO. There's some improvements to Lumix Flow version 1.4. And on this channel, I really want to talk about things that I use often. I don't really use Lumix Flow that often, so I'm not going to talk more about that. If you want to see all the nitty-gritty details of the new Lumix firmware, you could just click the link in the description, and it'll have all these new updates right there listed for you. Again, keep it a buck. I was already really satisfied with the Lumix S1 Mark II as is. I knew they were going to have a firmware update. And, I'm glad they did, because now these low test having douchebags out there who was too scared to try the Lumix S1 Mark II because, it's going to overheat in 4K 120. Somebody had their camera overheat when they were filming inside a microwave in 120 frames per second 4K. Now you could go out, try your Lumix S1 Mark II with confidence. Again, the firmware update is welcome. And again, if you're going to be filming some crazy ass shit in 95-degree weather in direct sunlight, there's ways to alleviate any risks of overheating by simply using an external SSD to record, or use SD cards only and avoid CF Express. But even with the new firmware, CF Express should be safe in most use cases in terms of thermal management. So there's that. Good on you, Lumix. And I look forward to the next firmware where you improve the camera even more just for fun. It is currently 12 a.m. I wanted to do this video earlier in the day, but unfortunately I had to do errands such as take my mother-in-law to her doctor's appointments. And so now I'm going to have to edit this until probably 2 a.m. so that it is posted by 9 a.m. this morning when the firmware is officially announced. So until next time, lighten up.
Hey man, you got a new camera?
Yeah, this is actually the Lumix S1II. I actually have it all rigged out with the tilter cage on it. Those tube doucher shills actually weren't shilling. This is a great camera.
Oh my god, Lumix S1 Mark II. It's trash and unprofessional.
Why do you say that?
It have an overheat problem.
Bro, I use this camera to film 6K open gate for like 3 hours. 5.1K 60 frames per second open gate in like 95-degree weather. I didn't even get an overheat warning.
No man, I have a friend with an uncle who cousin saw on the Facebook a guy say his friend father with a Lumix S1 Mark II it overheat in 5 minutes with 4K 60.
They must have been in India filming Indian street food directly on top of a bucket of hot brown oil surrounded by hot and humid sweaty pits.
You need to do the overheat test outside in direct sunlight 4K 60.
Bro, no one films a long duration 4K 60p in shitty ass direct sunlight. I am not gonna do a bunch of unrealistic overheating tests.
Let me show you. You could film the camera with 4K 60 put in the microwave. It overheat. It unprofessional. You film the camera 4K 60 in the air fryer. It overheat. It unprofessional. You film the camera like that 4K 60. It overheat. It unprofessional.
Bro, back your mouth away from the damn camera. Your hot ass fish sauce breath will melt the camera before it even overheats.